what did the meaning of the New South have for African Americans who were living and dealing with this boomtown that was Atlanta as it entered into the 20th century? He wasn't looking to have them invest, but they were a part of this system, and it must have had a very significant meaning that for them that I presume is different than what he meant.
Right. That's I think an essential, very good question. You know, in some respects, I think Grady's vision was going to scrub race out of it. You know, the vision of the heritage of slavery was to forget about it and to move forward without that kind of shackle of that. Grady himself on race is a white supremacist, basically. Not so apparent when he makes that speech in 1886, the famous New South speech. But as Grady evolves, he dies in 1889, so between the New York speech of 86 and his death, there's a three-year period, and he's constantly making speeches. But his white supremacy becomes increasingly apparent. So really, that's part of what I talked about earlier, that the fiction of the New South, the underbelly of the New South really is that white supremacy undergirds it. That being said, I think there is a vision of progress that African Americans embrace in Atlanta. They see progress in terms of many of the same things that Grady's talking about. And the differences are you know, when they talk about progress, they talk very much in terms of racial progress. They talk about the progress of the race. They talk about black manhood. But they also disassociate themselves from the heritage of slavery. I mean, it's not some in a sense, sort of year one in terms of what you hear black people talking about in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s begins with the end of slavery. So the progress of the race is very much a post-slavery phenomenon. But there's a clear divergence in terms of what Grady is offering here and what that means for African Americans. You know, what they see, and that divergence becomes, I think, increasingly apparent to the African American community.
And this is an African American community that is remarkably successful. This is a community that has people like W.E.B. Du Bois, and it has these fine educational institutions, and this in itself is surprising to perhaps some people. Where are they finding the support to do such things? If white supremacy is the underbelly of the New South, why is it tolerating the growth of what is essentially a very important black middle class that's coming up to define what matters to African Americans as a whole, education, church, and family?
Mm-hmm.
How are they able to accomplish this in Atlanta?
There are some unusual kind of characteristics to Atlanta, I think, that make this possible. One of the key and most important is I think, the development of Atlanta University as an institution. Atlanta University is founded by the white abolitionists from the American Missionary Association, who very consciously are attempting to use the education of African Americans as a way to elevate the race, in many ways very paternalistically, but they're in large part egalitarians. So you have this sort of enclave, one way to describe it, of abolitionist and post-abolitionist northern whites that are consciously trying to train in a black elite as fully educated as any other white elite or young white person anywhere in terms of liberal arts education. So Atlanta is not geared toward black masses, but it is geared toward creating a leadership class which would ultimately challenge white supremacy. That's the little piece there. Du Bois, after all, teaches it. He is not a graduate of Atlanta University, graduate of Fisk, which is a sister institution in Nashville, also an AMA institution. But Du Bois comes, one of the first black faculty members at Atlanta, and he comes to Atlanta University very much imbued with that mission, that post-abolitionist mission. To me, that's one of the critical pieces. I mean, there are others as well. I think the degree of autonomy, and we're talking relative terms here, but you think about rural Georgia, the extent of terror and oppression and violence. Atlanta is a bit of an enclave. I mean, there is a federal, continues to be a federal presence. Working Fearsome is a federal post. survives. In this enclave, there is a degree of protection. Many moments limited protection. But looking back, you think about particularly this period where Du Bois is there. It's a very interesting place, and all kinds of ideas are being discussed in ways that resonate in terms of the struggle, African American struggle nationwide. And you think about centers of Black America today. Really, Atlanta must surely be regarded as one of them. And the roots of that clearly, seems to me, are in the war and the aftermath of the war, and what had the unique kind of convergence